Become a sponsor today by visiting patreon.com/psychologyis.
You mentioned something about schizophrenia and potentially having some type of ability to predict genetically if someone will have schizophrenia, which is very interesting to me. I've spent some time looking into schizophrenia pretty significantly, and of all the conditions in the DSM, my assessment is that for many of them, there may never be a genetic profile simply because of the, as people like to call it, heterogeneity within people with that condition. You know, many of the DSM criteria are so loose that there's no way that all of the people who fit those criteria will have the same neurological or genetic profile. So that makes it difficult. But schizophrenia, I do think, is one of the more clearly defined and easily recognizable conditions. So I can see how how there could be a genetic profile that predicts that. So my question to you is, maybe, like, to what degree of certainty do you feel like you have in predicting it? And do you think that a person could have that genetic profile and be a sort of unique person? But, you know, I don't, to whatever degree it's true that there's a connection between madness and genius, is there any possibility that that genetic profile could sort of have a positive outcome?
That's a great question. So I think it's good to elaborate on, for example, schizophrenia. It'll kind of illuminate really the nature of how genetic prediction works these days. Like how does the actual, statistical prediction of a, heritable disease work? So, if you have access to a big data set, let's suppose you have hundreds of thousands of genomes from different people, and suppose you have a subpopulation in there that has been collected because they were diagnosed as schizophrenic, and maybe even like have kind of maybe a severe case of schizophrenia. Okay, so imagine that you have, just making these numbers up, but suppose you have 20,000 genomes of people who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and then maybe 100,000 or 200,000 genomes of people with no schizophrenia diagnosis and seem to be completely healthy, psychologically healthy. Then what's done is that using, the fancy term now is AI or machine learning, you basically are analyzing those genotypes, trying to allow the computer to figure out which features of their DNA are correlated to being schizophrenic or anti-correlated to having had a schizophrenia diagnosis. And at the end, you have a predictor. Then you go to a completely different population of people that have not been used in any of the training. And the different population might even be people, and commonly is, people that were born in different decades, even on a different continent from the ones that were originally used in training. So you might have trained on some people in Europe, but you're testing it on some people in the United States or something like this. And then you just see if conditional on having a high risk score, according to the computer, for schizophrenia, people with that risk score in the validation set, what is their probability of actually having a schizophrenia diagnosis? So you don't tell the computer who has this, it's all kind of, that information is not given to the computer, just each individual genotype. That's the only information that's given. Mm-hmm. And in the ideal case, you could even compare siblings. You could compare two brothers who were raised in the same family, one of which is high risk according to the predictor and the other one is not, and determine how often you've called the correct sibling that actually has schizophrenia. So all this testing has been done. And a typical situation would be something like, if I know nothing about you, maybe you have a 1% risk of schizophrenia. I don't know the exact population prevalence, but I think it's in the low percents, maybe 1% or something. Right. So if I know nothing about you, the chances that I pick you out of a data set, the chances that you've been diagnosed as schizophrenic is maybe only about of order 1%. But for the subpopulation that the predictor says, these people are in the 99th or even higher risk for schizophrenia, there might be a 10%, 20%, 30% chance that in that subgroup, so conditional on the computer saying this person is an outlier for schizophrenia risk, the actual absolute probability that the person is schizophrenic could be 10 times or even 20, 30 times higher than in the general population.
Mm.
So we can never say with certainty, usually. I mean, for real outliers, sometimes you can almost say, like, for sure that woman is going to have breast cancer, and that we're almost at that level. But for the very best predictors. But for most of them, we can only tell you that this person has 10 times normal risk or 20 times normal risk. And so therefore, in a group of those people that's assembled, the fraction of them that have schizophrenia will just be enormously higher than in the general population. And that's what's meant by, quote, predicting schizophrenia risk. We're actually predicting the risk. We're not predicting that you have schizophrenia. We're just predicting that it's a little different with Down syndrome, because with Down syndrome, I would say, I'm not predicting the risk that the baby has Down syndrome. It will have Down syndrome because it's got
Already does, right.
Yeah. So we're not quite at that stage yet with these more complicated polygenic risk predictors, but we're getting there. There are cases where we could say, like, yeah, I'm 80, 90% sure this woman is going to have heart disease,
Wow.
or something like that. So, yeah.
That's fascinating to me. And I would personally be very interested in, as this research unfolds and technology develops, when you are able to find, like you said, this subset of people who the computer says are at high risk of schizophrenia, and then let's say 20% of them have it, that would be extremely impressive to be able to compute and predict that. And I would also be very interested in the other 80% who the computer predicted would have it and what their psychological profile might be. And if they might have some type of unique characteristics, but they've managed to stay functional.
Right. You might find that this particular set of people was predicted that they might end up having schizophrenia, but they didn't. And you might find it's because of certain environmental aspects of their upbringing or their family life, or something about their environment, not their genes, protected them against schizophrenia. So all of this is, if you just took a step back and you said, okay, in the 25th century, what is precision medicine going to look like, or precision psychology or psychiatry? It's got to look like that, right? You're going to, as one piece of information about your patient, you're going to want to have their DNA. You're maybe going to want to have some information about their upbringing and et cetera, and some computer analysis. And, that's where we're headed.